we're starting off talking about Southeast Asia in this series. For those of you who were here last week, you remember that I looked at the economic growth rates for major economies in the US and also Asia. And we found that a lot of the jumping off places to China, like Singapore and Hong Kong and Taiwan, and maybe even Korea, experienced dramatic reductions in their economic growth over the last 2 years. Partly this may be due to the economic slowdown in China itself, which is also, its growth rate has dropped. But in contrast, Southeast Asia may have had some blips, but they're actually maintaining economic growth rates higher than the world average. So in, I think it was Malaysia, had a 6.5% growth rate in 2010 and then dropped a little bit, but is back to a 6.0 growth rate or something like that for this year. You can find my slides from last week and see what they were. So we're starting off with Southeast Asia to find out why Southeast Asia is playing some sort of a special role, especially in the entrepreneurial sector, in the startup sector. We've got two great panelists who are practitioners as well as teachers in this regard. Sitting closest to me is Don Tran, who is the chairman and CEO of a company named GES Inc. And Don has over 20 years of experience in the semiconductor industry. He's worked in all kinds of vice president and other executive positions in product development, global business development, sales and marketing on the technology side. And the companies he's worked for include groups like Matson Technology, Semitool, Silicon Valley Group, and Watkins Johnson. He's also the co-founder and has been an executive officer of 3 high-tech startup companies in the semiconductor space. So GES is a turnkey high-tech semiconductor and production equipment design and manufacturing company. They make the equipment to make the chips. And it has operations in the US and in Vietnam and in India. And I think I'll ask Don to give his comments first, and then I'll introduce Dr. Ed Rubesh, who's an adjunct faculty member of Thammasat University in China, and also a serial entrepreneur, Thammasat University in Bangkok. Freudian slips, right? So Ed is also a serial entrepreneur in Thailand and has started, I think, 4 ventures, right? Yeah. Including one that is in the late stages of growth and maybe even looking public in the future, which we won't ask you about because that would mess things up. Anyway, let's ask Don if you'd give us your prepared comments first about Southeast Asia.
Thank
Floor's
you.
to you.
Okay. Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm Don Tran. Richard introduced me when he said great, I mean Ed, you know. Before I go into talk a little bit about my company, the reason I will talk about my company, not because I want to market my company today, more so I want to share with you, why did I get started in Southeast Asia, start a company, and what the kind of capability that you can get access to, and what kind of money, what kind of possibility you see, right? Today. But before I start off, when Richard talked about what the role of Southeast Asia in a global strategy, particularly in the high tech,
feel free to walk around.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll follow you.
All right. Okay. But really, the cell phone that you have, the iPad that you carry, the car you drive, the television that you have at home, the flat panel screen at home. Majority of those are made in Southeast Asia, believe it or not, right? So the technology, the high-tech technology, a lot, the role that Southeast Asia play in the high-tech area is just very enormous and a lot closer to you for your daily life today, right? For the solar, the medical device, the automobile that you drive, the LED LED light that you're about to change in your house, your appliance, are now the majority are made in. So throughout the number of years that get investment and foreign companies to come in, the infrastructure being built, the resources being trained.
Aside, you're really dividing your time mostly between the U.S. and Vietnam now?
Well, I divide my time between, like a quarter in India, a quarter in U.S., and a quarter in Japan, and a quarter in Vietnam.
And the rest of it in the airplane?
Yeah, the rest is, occasionally I get to go to Europe, to visit customers and whatnot, Yeah, well, the last time, and then the rest of the time at the airport or somewhere, some motel, cheap motel in Europe.
So I haven't looked at your slides.
Yeah. So kind of give you the introduction into the talk, and then I give you a little bit about my company. But again, the purpose is to share with you the capability, an example of a company in Asia, in Southeast Asia, and what kind of capability, resources, and the possibility that you can access to build your company and operate. So our company, like Richard introduced, we are in a semiconductor related technology such as solar, LED, and displays. Those technologies derived from the nanotech, or if you will, the semiconductor technology. We are in the design, help the customer to design the equipment to produce those devices. We are not a device manufacturer, but we produce those equipment to help produce those device. It's like solar to put on your roof, or the LED light, the chip that's gonna operate your LED, and the display, the flat panel display, the OLED technology that now you see in the Samsung, thin, FPD, and all those devices that you have in your iPad and your Samsung Galaxy and whatnot. Right? So we started a company. I founded this company in early of 2007. And immediately, we see the opportunity in Southeast Asia, and so we went and invest right away in Vietnam. And then we established a subsidiary in Japan, and then a couple of years later, we acquired a software company in India. We invest about $80 million of US dollar in the company. And today, we start out with 2 person. Today we have more than 180 employees. It can give you an idea that the possibility of how fast you can grow the company. And there's plenty of investors, plenty of institutional as well as angel investor that were willing to invest in the company that want to do business or based out of Southeast Asia. Our company invested by a couple of Japanese institutions, one of the venture capital called IT Farm based out of Shinjuku, and then the other one, the Development Bank of Japan. Matter of fact, we are very proud to be the first foreign company that invests by this DBJ, and this DBJ, they only invest in a large company like Japan Airlines, they bail out Japan Airlines, that sort of thing, that kind of Federal Reserve. Yeah, they're very big. And then the IDG Venture Vietnam, this is the investment arm out of Vietnam, but it's really the headquarters in Boston. If you heard of IDG, the International Data Group, they're very successful. The company, we're also fortunate to attract well-known people in the industry. For example, Dr. Dan Maydan, one of the Hall of Fame, Silicon Valley Hall of Fame. He's the former president of Applied Materials, one of the largest semiconductor equipment company in the world. And then Robert McKnight, who's been in the industry for many years and have buy and sold many companies and successful. And Dr. Henry Nguyen is the managing general partner of IDG Venture in Vietnam. He also His fund have $100 million fund. He invests all over Southeast Asia in the internet space, in the mobile game, e-commerce and whatnot. And Julian Nguyen is also one of the well-known person in the Silicon Valley. He found many companies that got acquired. One of them is a system design. Okay. So our headquarters here is quite small in U.S. in San Jose, but we put a lot of investment in Southeast Asia. One of them is in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. That we own that building. We build that building from scratch, and we own that. And that where we do a lot of design work. We do a lot of manufacturing, and then we provide aftermarket service. That meaning that when we design, we manufacture the equipment, and the people that from Vietnam that they go out to the world, to the location of the world to do the installation, provide the equipment services. The reason, the point that I'm bringing up to you, that means that today, the Southeast Asian people can go anywhere in the world, right? There's no limitation anymore. Yeah, just still you need to require some visa and whatnot, but it become much easier than many years ago, right? And a couple of years ago, we didn't have the software group, the software capability, particularly in our field that we can find in Vietnam or in Thailand. So we look elsewhere. We look where they have the best software, and so we acquire a company in India. We have about 60 people, software engineer in India, and we have a subsidiary in Japan. Why? Because we have a lot of customer, not only investor from Japan, but we have a lot of customer, a lot of equipment OEM, the OEM meaning original equipment manufacturer that they want to outsource to company that have a low cost, operation base like us, right? And have the capability. Okay, so we very focus on high-tech production equipment. We only do low volume, high precision, high config, and complex type. The reason I pointed out that people will look at it and say, really, in Southeast Asia, yeah, and I would say yes. That meaning what? Meaning that the resources. We have the skill, resource, and talent to be able to provide this sort of thing that this can be unheard of, a few years ago. Today, yes, we can. Yeah. We focus on electrical mechanical design and bring it to assembly. We also do automation and bring out to the field, and then we take care of the entire life cycle of the product that we help design and build. That means that we provide a whole gamut of turnkey of a product. Why we doing it? We doing it because we want to take away the thing that the company in U.S. or Japan or in Europe that has spent a lot of money on overhead, and that become a burden to them. Right? So if they outsource all of those of that, then they can focus their money into where it mean the most, which is the R&D, where it's the technology, right? Because today, in Southeast Asia, we have resourcing capability. We can handle this engineering stuff and in the manufacturing stuff. We have enough technology and we have enough capability to do so. And especially the supply, the material supplies change. Right? Again, this is another. So what do? Actually in Vietnam we have 100,000 square feet of space, and we build clean room. We have 100 people there. We take order from the engineering work all the way to assembly, to installation, field service, and aftermarket. Okay, so here's the sum of our product, right? So, for example, semiconductor. This is one of the state-of-the-art semiconductor equipment on your left screen, and we get into LED. This is where you do wire bonding of the device that can put into your LED light. And we do robot. We design and produce robot the semiconductor grade that carry wafer, it's ultra clean type of wafer that's used for your semiconductor device. And then do flat panel, right? We build equipment to inspect the array on a flat panel. So I kind of give you some examples of the technology that the Southeast Asian resources can manage. This slide to tell you we compete globally. We compete for global customer, not just the regional market. We compete for customer from all over the world, right? And we believe that we can be the best. And then the question of many years ago and said, you go into Southeast Asia and you think you can compete globally. A few years ago, it may not be the case, but today, especially the last few years, we can confidently say, yes, we now can compete. Then how did that happen? What that cultivate that kind of foundation? Very simple. The growth in the region, right? As a dividends that from the decade of globalization and FDI. FDI means a foreign direct investment that helped the economic growth, like Richard alluded to earlier. And the middle class, the rise of the middle class, educated population. The internal market is huge. Internal market, the mobile, the social media users. Combined 7 countries in Southeast Asia. The 600 million people that account for 10% of the market. As you know, Ericsson just recently given out the data. Their market for mobile phone is for the 7 countries in Southeast Asia, 13 billion from 2011-2012. That's 78% jump from year to year. But you know what? The interesting point is that it only account for 25% of all mobile in Southeast Asia. So you can see the market growing. And then as people get richer, they can afford to buy automobile, more electronic stuff. Especially the mobile, right? And it's a lot of investment that coming into, and then a lot of people are betting on the mobile for social media users, like Facebook. They did really well in Southeast Asia. Instagram, but big in Thailand, right? That's where the untapped competitors, competition. Why? When you talk about internet penetration, that's a wrong metric. You got to talk about wireless. You got to talk about mobile, right? Because it's more expensive to put in landline, And so everybody in Southeast Asia, have a phone. Even a farmer, in the rural country, have a telephone. So that is your market. And the infrastructure due to the logistic, road, freeway, port being built using FDI investment. And then out of that you have, and then the globalization allow the student to study abroad, and I see in here, many Asian students here. That's the evidence of, and then these people are coming back to Southeast Asia, with all the education, all the knowledge, and that's the resource that are available to you. And not only that, it's also expat. Why not? Fast internet connection, low cost living, beautiful beach, good food. Why not? That's the place that you want to start up your company. And on top of that, the reason for outgrowth, in the last few years, because the availability of material that we can be used in the high tech, in the semiconductor. A few years ago that we are struggling, right? Because labor cost, low labor cost is never sustainable, right? We don't bet on low labor cost because that's not sustainable. We are betting on skill, quality, and combined best cost. Right? Okay, so that kind of
Yeah.
give you an introduction of what GS is about.
So I got to ask you a question. And I'm going to get set up for Ed's presentation, but while I'm changing slides around, equipment design and manufacturing, right, is one of those kind of old-style technology industries.
That's
How
right.
in the world did you attract investment when people are all after, Twitter clones?
Well, if you start up.
You're talking about the market growth and the mobile platform
Yeah.
growth and all of that in
Right.
Southeast Asia.
Right. Well, obviously, I went into the wrong business, right? But in reality, if you start up a semiconductor equipment company in U.S., I mean, it's almost impossible to raise money, right? It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
But and then.
I was about to say,
yeah,
it is
right.
almost
But
impossible to raise money.
But for us, the attraction is that because the evolution of the industry, that people, first of all the production are in Asia, of 70% in Asia. Everything shipped from Europe to Asia. Yeah.
Okay, I want to follow up on that a little bit. In your discussion, you said you're competing for global customers, and you had said earlier in your talk that you were really looking at the resources in Southeast Asia, including people, and also access to materials and so forth. To what extent do you think the growth of things like manufacturing industries in Southeast Asia, in those markets, has it contributed to your growth? Didn't Intel build a plant in Vietnam?
Intel built a plant in Vietnam, and then they built a plant in Malaysia and in other places as well, in China, right. So yes, in a way that it because of the growth in Southeast Asia, that lure more and more high-tech company to the grow. And why are they coming in? Well, it's not because cost, because they are seeing the growth of the internal regional market. I earlier discussed that more and more people using the technology content, right?
And one last question before I ask Ed to talk. What would you say was the thing that has been the biggest new thing that you've learned since 2007? Was it change in the market, change in the direction of the way things developed, or was it, the whole kind of...
Well, there's an up and down. The economy is up and down, but we from the regional standpoint, we see more positive. We see growth. We see things changing for the better. There's a lot of challenges. We just looking back a few years ago. There's no such thing of credit card use in Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
And today, we have e-commerce, right? So that changes, right? A few years ago, that we come in and people say we're going to try to ship the equipment, and people scratch their head and say how, right? Today, it's so easy, it's a no-brainer anymore. So those are the things that enable you, and of course the economic growth, for the last few years. And you always see the positive thing.
Sure.
And you look for the positive thing.
Don, you're not quite off the hook yet, okay? Because what I'm going to do is ask Ed to give some comments, and then we'll come back and we'll have a Q&A and sort of general discussion.
Right.
How do we do this? Do you want to sit here? Is that the easiest thing to do, or
either one is fine?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. In fact, actually, the presentation we just heard from Don is a perfect introduction to a little of the work that we do. I see some faces that we've seen over several years, so you know a little bit about the work that we're doing in Thailand. And in fact, actually, it's probably good that he left the room. We're trying to break out of that because we consider that this has been the strength of Southeast Asia in the past, and now what we're trying to do is move towards what might be the next wave. So there's no doubt the manufacturing capabilities of Southeast Asia, Thailand, where we're based, but all the other countries in the region are very, very strong. And the key is, how do you move out of that to higher value stuff? Now, some of you who were here last year saw that I told you a little bit about our way of thinking, which was fear of the known. And I want to just build on that a little bit. It's not the same presentation, okay? So build on a little bit about how we're doing things and where that's leading us, hopefully beyond manufacturing and contract manufacturing, which is a valuable service, but it's a service that's very competitive.
Yeah, but don't make a mistake. Don's company is doing design
Well,
and
that's true.
manufacturing
This is the
of
key. The
equipment.
design is
They're
the
selling
key.
product to the manufacturer.
Correct, yeah. Yeah.
So this is not the same as doing contract manufacturing.
Correct. That was a slip. But the point is to move also out of the manufacturing sector as well in some ways. Okay.
okay.
Yeah. So those of you who've we talked about this last year a little bit. Well, quick introduction. I've been in Thailand 20 years. Most of my work has been in the auto industry before I got involved with entrepreneurship development. But I started out with what I hoped was a provocative statement last year. I hope it's equally provocative this year, and that entrepreneurs in developing countries are more innovative than entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. And the reason I wanted to put that out there is to provoke a little bit, but also to think about the process of entrepreneurship. And this is the key, because the work we're doing is in the development of entrepreneurs in thinking and looking at things, looking at opportunities in a slightly different way. So I'm going to go through a couple of the slides from last year in review and then show you how we've kind of taken that on. So, you know, the way I start out this discussion, I start out with a standard, you know, some innovation theory, and the way innovation theory goes is there's some people here that might be called the cutting edge of the innovators, and then there's this mass market, and then there's those other guys that don't get it. That's kind of the stock standard marketing definition. But a more important way of looking at it is how that group of different types of people build a new market. So what happens is when anything is new, the people who are willing to take a risk on that newness are the ones called innovators. Now, it doesn't mean they're necessarily wanting something high-tech. It just means they have such a problem that's so important to them, they're willing to seek out solutions, okay? So that's the people down here, and it goes up towards the mass market, where they're used to having everything in place. The financing is in place, the brochures look nice, the operating manual works without typos, there's an 800 number or whatever the equivalent is in other countries to get help, you know, all of that stuff. So that's the development of any market, at least in a theoretical sense. Now we can say in that market, any general market, that this is what happens. So in the mass market, you know, when a customer buys something in the mass market, they know where they are. Okay, whatever the product is, you start with a compact car, and as you get a better job, you move up to a mid-sized car, and as you get a family, you move up to a minivan. You kind of are put on a path towards buying new products. Okay, that's what a mass market is like. But innovators, by definition at this point, innovators are always finding a path. They're always trying to figure out, how does this thing work? I think there's a value there for me. I've got a problem that no one else has been able to solve. How do I work that out? And can this thing help me? So that's kind of the difference along this curve. And then there's, you know, of course, people in the middle, you know, who are kind of see a path and they're willing to take a bit of a risk on it. And there's a whole continuum as you know, go through this. And that's where I made this distinction. You know, there's no doubt that the products coming out of Silicon Valley, the services coming out of Silicon Valley, even the design, as we see here, coming out of Silicon Valley, is innovative. But the important argument here is that being an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley is mass market. All the steps are in place. You know who to talk to, where to talk to. You know, you even go up on websites now, and you know, like TechCrunch, and it tells you exactly what you got in Angel, and then what you got in Series A and B, and you know, a process is very well established. Okay, and in fact, it's getting more established all the time. For those of us, or me anyway, who sit outside and kind of watch, it seems like it's becoming like a supermarket, you know, that things are becoming so well established in this process. And I almost think sometimes I'm humored by it, as you're going to see later on in the presentation. It becomes very, you know, the process of being an entrepreneur seems to be like you're on a flow chart and there's no way out of that flow chart. Okay, so understand the distinction. I'm not talking about the products and services and ideas that are coming out of it. I'm talking about the process of being an entrepreneur. And the reason that's important is in developing countries, it's the opposite. And that's the key challenge we have, is that the user experience, if you will, being an entrepreneur, you're in the woods. You've got to find your own way. You don't know necessarily who to talk to or who's likely to give you money or what industries people are out there supporting. It's changing quickly, of course, but it's much more of you have to find your own path down here. And it's true, of course, because of that, the products and services that are developed are often a little bit more mundane. They're more basic. They're more necessities rather than cutting-edge products or services. So the situation is reversed, and I admit trying to be a little bit of a provocateur with the comment, but entrepreneurs, to be entrepreneurs, regardless of their product or service, have to be innovative as they go around and find their path through this. So basically, that's the conclusion I'm showing you there. And I always put Fred Terman into my presentation. He inspires a lot of what we do. You should not graduate from Stanford without learning about who he is. He's not just a name on a building that no longer exists. He really is important to your history, but he really inspires the kind of work that we do because of the way he brought things together. I urge you to learn more about the history if you don't. So because of that, one of the quotations I've always loved with him, and which inspires me in the work we do, is, he started out at a time when Silicon Valley wasn't, well, there certainly wasn't anything called the Silicon Valley. It was Stanford, at least in its technical world, was very far on an edge of the map. Everything else was done on the East Coast, and he set out to establish this place that you guys are all in as a technical center. And I've always loved the fact that when he started out, the rest of the world looked very, very big and we were really small, and through his efforts and a whole bunch of other people's efforts managed to reverse that. And I think that's an inspirational statement. Anyone who's in a area where you're trying to develop entrepreneurship could do well by trying to follow this kind of not the methods necessarily, but the goal to understand that when he started, this place was also a bit of a wilderness when it comes to entrepreneurship. And so what that brings us to the stuff that we're kind of doing is the real opportunities of being an entrepreneur. So you're right, Professor Dasher made a very important distinction. We're trying to break people out of the manufacturing mentality, or the contract manufacturing mentality anyway, where unfortunately they are very developed market.
On cost.
That's exactly the thing right at the top, competing on cost, because you don't have an advantage over anyone else. You buy the same, unless you buy the specialty equipment from Don, you buy the same equipment that everyone else has.
Yeah.
And the goal is to move down that path, and what we call that is not only being willing to deal with the unknown. Some people say entrepreneurs are good of dealing with unknown. We say you actually want to fear the known, that the unknown is your friend, and that's the mindset change we're trying to bring about. And it's hard to bring about. If you're the parents of our students, many of who are sitting here, have grown up on clear markets by being a supplier to a Nike or being a supplier to a well-known brand, and it's hard to break out for the next generation of entrepreneurs and say, now you're going to have to find your own brand. Mom and dad say, why? We didn't have to.
So Ed, just to ask you a question about this chart. You start with what is kind of common thinking, that you compete on cost.
Yep.
And then really looking at being willing to take the risks of a new endeavor is something that fewer people do. You're moving more toward the early adopter stage.
Yep.
And on down through thinking out of the box, and finally you really become a true innovator when you get to this fear of the known stage.
You're a wimp, meaning you want to avoid competition. You want to find the places where you're alone, and we're going to show you some examples where we're in that area. You want to fear where the hundreds and thousands of people are doing.
Because they'll eat you up.
Because
they'll want to be somewhere different.
Well, you're all going to eat, you may even eat each other up. There may not be, but the point is there's going to be a lot of people trying for the same stuff. Okay. Whereas if you can find these areas, fear the known part, and look for the areas where you've got some and the key here is developing countries have those advantages as well. Okay, it's not just sitting in Silicon Valley finding the new technology out of a laboratory. Not the same opportunities, but equal opportunities exist in developing countries in finding non-competitive opportunities, and that's what we kind of want to show you. So the next step that we take our people on, and that I actually urge everyone, because as I'm going to tell you in a few slides, I think there's a danger even in a place like Silicon Valley. Try to do this in your life, okay? Don't even think about it as an entrepreneurship point of view. We're all being programmed to buy products on a path, to live on certain paths, and what we need to do, it basically comes down to the world is designed to follow a recipe, right? And there's nothing wrong with this, okay? But you really want to be the person creating the recipe, okay? So you can't do this with everything. You know, none of us have the chance to research all the products we're going to buy and all the services we're going to buy. But choose a few places in your life, whether this is where your entrepreneurial life is or your own personal life, where you're creating the recipes. Don't be taken in and feel that you're always having to follow someone else's recipe. I'm going to show you some examples. Following a recipe is a good thing, but don't do it for everything in your life, okay? So sometimes it seems to me when we get to some of our processes, it's too much like paint by numbers, right? Including our entrepreneurship development process. It's like, do this, then do this, then do this, and you will be successful, okay? Well, there's creative activities where we don't have this paint by numbers thing, no matter how complicated it gets. I mean, you can even have complicated paint by numbers, but we can't strip the creativity part out of it, and we can't build a recipe for that creative part. You need to be in that uncertainty, at least in one part of your life or one part of your thing. And so let me give you an example. You might feel like I'm talking about things which are not prevalent in our lives, but I think you'll see why this example. You know, one of our instructors here is a dive master, so I use this example. Let's say you want to scuba dive. Well, PADI is a big dive organization. They've got your whole life planned out here. You start out as an infant bubbling around in a pool, and you can go all the way out through all of these things. And I think you'll just see that all our products and services are like that. And we try to move our students off of that both in life and in company. So let me give you just a couple of examples before I finish. You know, we call this write your own JD, write your own job description, you know, take control of your life. We also urge people to think big and to scale. And I have to add, I'm adding this one just for Silicon Valley. You know, I do think that there's a over-excitement about mobile phone apps. You know, there are some things you can do without a mobile phone app, and that you know, the mobile phone apps aren't likely to replace, and that's where a lot of our opportunities are. So here's a couple of ventures we're working on right now. Don talked about the benefits of mobile phones. You know, you can be anywhere. You don't have to put in wired infrastructure. How about doing it with water? Okay, this thing allows you, if you have any source of water, groundwater, underwater, whatever, no matter what where it comes from, this can make EU standard water with solar energy. You don't need to connect to electrical grid. You don't need to be connected to a water grid. So distributed water supply, perfect for developing countries. As you can see here, I mean, there's 800 million people around the world who don't have access to clean water.
Where did that come from? How did it get developed?
There's actually two technologies. One is developed in Thailand, another is developed in Germany.
Okay.
Here's a great example.
Basically, what was the role of the university? Was this outside the university completely, or what?
Completely outside the university, but here's where I'll show you where developing countries have their opportunity. This particular one was developed by a whole bunch of German engineers in Germany for the developing world. Well, they have sold, 30 machines in 8 years. Okay, so they've come to us to turn that around. They don't know the developing world. They know the technology, but they don't know how to get it out into the hands of the people. They don't know how to get into rural developing countries. So this is where entrepreneurs in developing countries also have a very, very valuable role to play. Another one, which is from students right here in the room, you know, a lot of Southeast Asia is agricultural still. You know, it's still 60 or 70% of the output of Thailand, but a lot of farmers are susceptible to cash crops, you know, sugar, rubber, things like that. So this is a project to reverse that by helping farmers plant crops that can be turned readily into biomass. This is non-food crops, for some of you who might be worried about the social impact. Non-food biomass that can be converted into energy, providing a better return price back to farmers. And as long as we work on the assumption that energy prices are not going down anytime soon, which in Thailand they're not going to because the demand is far outstripping supply, then they will hopefully have a more stable price, even if it's a cash crop, more than sugar and more than rubber, which fluctuates up and down. At another end, this is a model that's very common in California, but not so common in Asia, is to provide, this is a subscription service for organic food, okay, which farm boxes are very common in the Bay Area. But what this is valuable for is it provides market for small organic farmers. So it's not just that it's a box to provide people who want organic food, it provides a platform for suppliers of organic food. So very valuable for developing country markets where the farmers need more income. This particular project also gets a lot of artisanal foods, cheeses and sausages and stuff like that. So we hope it's going to encourage more food entrepreneurs in some of the urban markets. And one of my favorites, a breast milk bank. Okay, get some Snickers usually anytime I bring this up, but it's actually a very serious issue. You've all heard probably by now that kids raised on breast milk are healthier than kids not, but it's even true for kids raised on breast milk not from their mom. So a lot of mothers can't nurse for a variety of reasons. If the kid is born premature, if the mother is HIV positive, so having a breast milk bank is very important. And so this particular group has been working to set up a breast milk bank for Thailand, and they're looking to expand that to Southeast Asia. So my point here is these are all things that move into areas which are not in direct competition with anyone, at least at the moment. They're completely moving out of the traditional businesses, and yet they're in developing countries and take advantage of the opportunities that are in developing countries. So those are the kind of messages that we try to put under this heading of fear the known. Don't go head to head with the obvious markets, but look for opportunities that completely stand outside.
Okay. Don, come back up and join us. And Ed, stay here. I think this is really interesting because you really looked at things that are, I think the primary reason for where the companies are is the market.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
You're really looking at the economic activities that are going on in the market, the opportunities specific to the market. You're looking at global markets, and you're looking at resources from Southeast Asia. I doubt if either one can be said to be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So I am curious, in this globalizing world, how does sort of world trends impact what's happening in Southeast Asia? Ed?
Yeah, I was afraid you were going to ask me that because every time Professor Dasher asks me to make a comment or a speech, it's always based on trends, and I am the worst person on trends. I found this out, some of you heard a few years ago. I was a licensing, director of licensing at National Lab, and you're supposed to be guessing trends. I can only think bottom up, so I go project by project. So unfortunately, I don't understand trends very well, and I'm usually wrong when I hit trends. My company's been hurt several times.
The absence of an answer means that you're seeing good market opportunities.
Yeah.
And you're seeing a continuation of good market opportunities.
Yeah.
How do you think the situation in Thailand has changed over the last 5 years?
Well, of course, there's been a series of crises that have been a problem back for that, back for the manufacturing people. That's been a problem, and we've had the political problems. But I think the opportunity is actually, as Don was saying, there's the continued growth of the middle class. There's continued growth of infrastructure throughout the region, and of ASEAN. The biggest thing is ASEAN. The attempts to integrate ASEAN into more of a single economic community, which unfortunately has been delayed 1 year, but it's coming.
Don, actually, I'm glad to have you as a foil to Ed for this time, because I think that this kind of playing a role in the world supply chain, there's still great business there. And what you're doing is clearly value added. You're able to compete against large companies like Applied Materials and these other companies.
They're my customer.
Okay, so they're your customer.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how things look to you. How's Vietnam changed in the last 5 years?
Surprisingly, it changed quite a bit. And if you go into, I'll give you an example. I go to the restaurant here. People too. The service people to take order by notepad and handwriting. When I go to Vietnam, every restaurant they carry, the waiter and waitress, they carry
an iPad or something,
an iPhone and an iPad to take your order and everything. That's amazing. And traffic horrendous in Vietnam. But a few years ago, there's a million and a million of motorbike. Today, the traffic is caused by the growing number of cars. And so you can see the lucrative.
Let me ask you about the resources you're dealing with, the human resources. A few years ago, I think it was really hard to find people with sufficient education to do a lot of the kind of advanced work, especially design work.
Well, it's just a lot of room for improvement, and then the education, the university is still lack of, resources and lack of budget and whatnot, but, the government do a lot of things to help out, and plus the foreign direct investment, plus the company that are coming in, and so the resources is, and like I said, people will be able to go outside Vietnam to study, and the expats coming in, so that combination that really help, and then I see the big improvement in that,
Okay, so I've got all kinds of questions, but let's open the floor. Anybody, questions, comments?
Protection, specifically in Thailand and some of the other governmental infrastructure in terms of normal laws and protections. We take a lot of things for granted here that don't always exist in other countries. How is it in Vietnam, in Thailand right now?
In Thailand?
Let's do both, because this is a real important issue.
I would imagine actually they're similar in both. Obviously, there is always the issue of things like music and video, movies and DVDs and stuff like that, which is, a well-known problem. Although it's also, I understand they're even available in the U.S. if you know where to look. But so beyond that piece, if you're talking about launching a company based on IP, the Thai government certainly takes it very, very seriously. And to be honest, in my opinion, takes it too seriously, meaning not the protection of it, but I think the people in development of science and technology are now are valuing IP itself too highly and not thinking about the business model, not putting in a proper business model that's going off to the market. I've worked, as I said, I was a director of a TLO, and people just talked about protection, and you couldn't get shake the scientists up to start thinking about business models, serving customers and stuff like that. So maybe it's an overreaction the other way. People know it needs to be fixed, but I think it's probably overreacted a little bit too far now.
Don?
Yeah. Well, similar to Thailand, Vietnam government putting a lot of restriction, and they do respect the IP. It's important for them to educate people that there's no way that the country can grow. If we can continue to infringe other people's IP. In reality, there will always be some infringement, some copy.
How do you deal with employees taking knowledge away? And
I'll address that. But at the same time, we're talking about economic growth, and people start to, once people that have money, they want quality stuff. Right? They want the real stuff. So that become less and less. And then, technology, there's always a way to protect technology, and the more advancement in technology, the more protection you have. So company with IP, they do more of that. To make it more difficult. At our company and many peer company in Vietnam, that we do, we also believe in that we gotta protect our company IP as well, our customer IP. So that's the only way to do business. Otherwise, you got to build trust. We're a developing country. Vietnam, Thailand, developing country. You got to remove the barrier. So the private as well as commercial, as well as government, they understand that. You got to remove all the barrier. And one of the barrier, you got to building trust with your business partner. And so you will see less and less of the concern of the IP protection. We put in a lot of IP protection policy and training to our employee, and I see a lot of that also practiced in our peer companies, our friend companies and whatnot. So,
I've got a quick follow-up question, and it can go to either one of you or both. In some places, if you have an IP problem or if you have some sort of a legal problem, you don't want to rely on the court system. There are various techniques that people have for
Right.
interacting with government to enforce their rights separate from the court system, not just suing somebody. What are some of the things you do in Vietnam? What are some of the things you might do in Thailand?
Specifically with the courts and the government, or
Yeah.
outside in the marketplace?
Either way.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's, however you protect yourself, separate from just, saying, I'm going to sue you.
Well, like anywhere, you try to avoid all the legal
Yeah.
conflict. You're trying to.
You incentivize people right to start with.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And like I said, with the technology today, we find ways to protect our IP as well, our customer IP.
Okay.
And the most important thing is awareness, and respect people's IP.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, again, the one, I would like to make the distinction between music and DVDs, which are kind of a special case. They're a high volume case, but the reason they're a special case is because they're usually in the hands of corrupt officials as well. I mean, it's an institutionalized form of IP problem. Okay, so keep that aside because that's a different issue. But the idea of losing your competitive edge to competitors through employees or something like that. I mean, the simplest way is to incentivize your employees well. I think one thing that hasn't always happened in the past, I think people within Southeast Asia, both local companies and in some ways companies coming into the region to kind of set up, have kind of viewed things more of the commodity with their human resources. And when you turn that around and start incentivizing people, making them feel good to be part of the company, then they begin to respect it as well. Defending against IP is probably the worst. I know Silicon Valley is an exception because Apple and Samsung seem to enjoy doing it, but outside of that, being in a defensive posture with IP, I think, is bad business, regardless.
Okay, good.
As preparation for your talk today, I'm reading Winner Take All by a local business executive, Richard Elkus. He tells a story of how Ampex basically invented magnetic recording tape, but that Akia Morita at Sony monetized it. First in the VCR, which used more semiconductors than any other product in the world at the time, and then of course the Sony Walkman.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us your thoughts on when do you think that type of innovation will actually come out of Southeast Asia or Asia in general? Like, is there an Apple
Better
computer
monetization of inventions, no matter where they're invented.
Yeah, instead of just being, say, a CN viewpoint.
Yeah. Maybe you'll be first.
Actually, I'm looking at the slides that you showed.
Yeah, I mean,
about
it's
these
going to be
companies
something. It's going to be
and-
something along those. We like the idea of a very innovative business model, taking something that might exist somewhere else or was developed somewhere else, and getting it monetized to that developing world. So, something along those lines. Actually, I'm thinking if you give me a few minutes, I'll come up with an example. It's already happened.
Actually, I'd pull it back to this TerraFresh.
Yeah.
The water station,
Yeah.
right? Water purification station.
Yeah.
Advanced economies where, you can drink water out of the tap is not the kind of place where you find a good solution to water problems where the infrastructure isn't. It's precisely places that are developing that will see the opportunities at the bottom of the pyramid, right?
In fact, the contribution we had almost right from the start when we were working with them was, in fact, this concept came from a guy in the room here. Say, let's make this an ATM. An ATM makes it so you don't have to have banks everywhere. You don't, so this is an ATM it's an ATW, I guess, or whatever. M is not money, it's machines. So. But anyway, it's a thing that dispenses water, at a single point anywhere you want, So that it was really the thinking around the business model that's making this an innovation. When I work with the scientists, I say inventions and innovations are not the same thing. They had the invention, but they haven't gotten the innovation until it's used by people. That's the key. So hopefully something like that. But there might be some examples which aren't well known, but are already some successes. Let me think about it before cocktails. So.
It may be that we'll be the last to notice, but large parts of the world and very large sales will be achieved by these companies elsewhere before they finally filter up to us. Anyway, good. Walter?
I have some, what I call unsubstantiated understanding about doing business in Thailand. When I speak about it, actually I sweat. Now, if the business is doing so well, will there be some government official interest in taking it over?
In Thailand, no. Venezuela, but not Thailand. No, I don't know of any. I don't know of any. Well, that's not true. There is a couple of famous instances, but that guy doesn't live in the country right now. Okay, but in general, Thailand, that kind of situation doesn't happen in Thailand. You will have, like in any market, lots of people trying to, several companies spring up to do the same thing. But I haven't seen too many situations where a government comes in to compete against.
The government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even still.
They go between people. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen that on an institutional level in the industries I've worked in.
Let me ask a related question to both of you. Are there non-business limits to growth for your company? You don't want to get to be too big for some reason or other, or because there's some sort of, it becomes more and more difficult with the government the more successful you are. Are there any kind of limits to growth in the businesses that you're doing? Don, I'll ask you first. Other than the market or, customer size or whatever.
That's a very difficult question to answer. Of course, there's always, some isolated case here and there. There's good people and bad people, good officials, bad officials, people, in this isolated case. But overall, there are challenges, there are limitations, but overall, I
But the
think
business still comes first.
yeah, business still come first,
Okay,
right?
okay.
And there's a competition. People see you doing well. Of course, some official, government official, who see that, look at the business, and they want to create the same way, and they use their power or influence to, suppress the competitor. It happens everywhere. Not just in Vietnam and in Thailand. You got to figure out your product differentiation, your secret sauce, and then compete from there. And I think that's a safe way to go. Follow the rule.
I mean, again, not countrywide. A little bit, just like Don said, there are individuals anywhere who can make your life miserable. So, with Tara Fresh, for example, one concern we have is that, at the local level, local influential people make water. So you could come head to head with something like that. But I'm from Seattle, and Boeing, arguably, has been controlled and manipulative of the government for a long time. So it happens at all kinds of levels. But I can't imagine it at a countrywide level. I could see it at different locations. But if you're growing, you have to create a relationship with the government like any big business does. So.
Good point for many different reasons. Other questions?
I have a similar question to both of you. First of all, for Don, I heard that some influence from Japan. For example, you said that big customer base from Japan and funding from Japan, and also culture-wise, in restaurant, many waitress or waiter using a handheld, or many people have a cell phone. I think that these are influence from Japan, I believe. But did you see these kind of influence or contribution from Japan? And for Thailand, I didn't hear anything, influence or contribution from Japan. But did you see any of these things from Japan in Thailand?
So actually, Mark's question is a very interesting question, because for so many years we've looked at globalization as having the United States in the center and then everybody else as a spoke out from this wheel. And yet, here in Asia, you've got a lot of interesting things going on intra-Asia. So Japan is a good example. How does Japan play with the Vietnam angle of what GES is doing? ask you that first.
Yeah, actually, it's a very good question from our experience, and then from our customer feedback and whatnot, and how they see Vietnam. I'm talking about Japanese customer and Japanese investors, and they see that there's a cultural similarity, easy to do business, and then recent conflicts, political conflict between in China and in Japan that make them look elsewhere, or find alternative, to lower their risk. So they obviously looking for a country that they can do business with, they can work with, and then lower their risk. And Vietnam and Thailand. A couple of years ago, there's only a few Japanese companies in Vietnam. Today, there are 2,000 companies invested in Vietnam, and they project to be 5,000 in a few years. I believe that's the 5,800 number of Japanese companies in Thailand right now, and so in terms of how much is the influence of the Vietnamese, of course, there's a lot of foreign investment from Japan. They're going to build subway in the first subway in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City. The fashion, the Japanese product. This is business. This is a trade. It's a fair trade. So indeed, that sort of thing are growing between two countries. And the relationship it date back to 50 years ago, way before the war ended. And recent, the Prime Minister Abe is a very strong proponent of Vietnam. So his first trip out of the country is Vietnam. After he got elected. So.
I sense part of your question is about consumer markets. Is that part of it?
It's not limited to consumer market, but in general, is there any contribution or influence from Japan?
Well, I mean, obviously heavy influence, but heavy influence on the industrial part. So many of the Japanese car makers are there, and in fact, some of their largest manufacturing operations outside Japan and the U.S. are in Thailand, and they're exporting all over the world. So industrially, and then in consumer markets, of course, snacks and beauty products and all of that kind of stuff. Although it's been overshadowed a little bit in the consumer markets by Korea. Korea is kind of more the hot thing that all these guys are influenced by. Gangnam style it's not Gangnam, whatever. Gangnam, yeah. So there's been obviously a long period of time for consumer things, but that did remind me of one innovation I wanted to add at the end. 7-Eleven, for example, is very, very strong franchise from Japan, originally U.S., but from Japan. And it's really one of the most innovative companies in Thailand, and I would argue that it's more innovative in Thailand than in Japan. They have catalogs in the stores, you can pay your phone bill, you can pay all of your bills there, you can get your internet. I mean, and I'm not in love with the 7-Eleven, but I'm so reliant on them that I can't stand going to a 7-Eleven anywhere else. The rest of the 7-Elevens in the world just don't have the services. So some of the Thai entrepreneurs have managed to take some of the Japanese service and product offerings and innovate quite a bit with them. So.
Jim?
Just taking this back home a bit. I think you guys have already kind of alluded to this, but just to ask it in a bit more succinct form. My question is, what can Silicon Valley most learn from Southeast Asia today? Or what parts of Silicon Valley would you most like to change based on your experience in Southeast Asia? Whatever you have thoughts about that.
What should we learn from Southeast Asia? It's a great question.
I'll answer the first part. The second part you have to change on your own. But the first part is, the opportunities in developing countries. And there are obviously groups on campus who are working in that area, the Center of Affordable Design and stuff. But I mean, the developing world, I always love this term world-class. Manufacturing, world class this or world, but that's not the world. World class is a very small percentage, and the rest of the world is world class. So it's getting things out to places that don't have highways and don't have power and don't have stuff like that. So, there are a few people moving in that area here, but that would be the emphasis.
Don?
Well, I wouldn't change anything. I think that's a lot for us to learn from Silicon Valley. This is my home, and I think this is the best place for innovation. All the talents are here. People. We go through changes and evolutions. so I don't see anything that you know, what we learn more about Silicon Valley. Everybody wants to try to be Silicon Valley ourselves, you know. That's one of the things that I think Singapore and Taiwan and Vietnam and other developing countries want to be, they want to develop the Silicon Valley by themselves. So.
So one of the dangers in talking about Southeast Asia is you have very different cultures, very different environments, very different situations. In a nutshell, what would you say is distinctive, especially for a startup entrepreneur or someone interested in entrepreneurship? What's distinctive about Thailand? What's distinctive about Vietnam? Maybe you go first.
So,
As opposed to other parts of
Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
I think one of Thailand's challenges is also what it's been its advantages in the past. I mean, it's a great place to be, so it's a bad place to try to make changes. I mean, it's comfortable.
People like it.
It's warm. Food's good. You don't really have to work hard to do anything. So, you know, it's hard to, you know, have the drive to make lots of changes because I mean, there's sabai, right? You know, the term that Thais uses. It's quite nice to just kind of be. Yeah,
we had a session on the Philippines last year in this series, and the panel said, you should do it in the Philippines because it's more fun there.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of similar. What's distinctive about Vietnam?
Well, you know, I heard recently somebody said that China is for trade and India for trade, and Thailand and Vietnam there's opportunity for investment. I mean, particularly in Vietnam, there's a you know, although it's still a communist country, but it's a free market country. It's a free economy, and it's a green field. It's a lot of opportunity, a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunity. And it's, in the last few years, the tremendous growth and the tremendous opportunity. So, you know, I say it's a good place to be, right?
Okay. I think I'll ask the last question for the session, and that is, if there was one or two things, but keep it no more than two, that you'd really like to change about Vietnam, about Thailand, especially in regard to being a more entrepreneurial environment, what would you change? Don, why don't you go first with that one?
I'd like to see the healthcare, you know,
Okay.
get improved. You know, healthcare access to everybody.
Whenever you say something like that, immediately I think there's a range of opportunities in this space.
Right. And certainly there's a lot of startup, you know, that focus on that space.
Yeah,
You know, in the pharmaceutical, in the healthcare system. You know.
Okay.
Right, so.
Interesting.
I mean, I think my answer comes directly in what I was presenting. I mean, create a mindset where people enjoy uncertainty a little bit more. You know, that fearing the known and being really, really comfortable in uncertain, open-ended situations. So that's really where we put our work.
And I think that brings us back to the essence of what, you know, this whole entrepreneurship concept is about. We've got some refreshments outside. Hope you'll stay around and meet our panelists and talk with each other, meet each other. If you would, though, please join me in thanking them for a great panel discussion.
Thank you.